Hello everyone, and welcome back to Marriage is Not the End. Here, we explore the many faces of marriage, the love and the pain, the lies and the truth. Today's story is about betrayal, about dignity, and about how a woman, after the illusion of her marriage shatters, slowly finds herself again, and in the end watches, with almost chilling calm, as the marriage built on lies collapses into a bloody farce. Let's call our heroine Emily. Emily and her husband Mark used to be the kind of couple people describe as a perfect match. Mark was the vice president of a fairly large tech company in New York, young, successful, and full of ambition. Emily was no dependent vine clinging to a man. She ran a well-known architectural design studio of her own, independent, intelligent, and elegant. To outsiders, their marriage looked like a power couple's union, the best possible version of love. But marriage is like a pair of shoes. Only the person wearing them knows if they truly fit. To others, all they see is the polished surface. The blisters forming underneath, the ones that make you toss and turn in pain at night, are invisible to everyone else. This story begins with a rainstorm. That day, Emily had just finished a week-long business trip in Chicago. The negotiations had gone well. Tired but in a good mood, she wheeled her suitcase to the arrivals area at JFK Airport and waited. Before she left for Chicago, she had video called Mark. He had promised, personally, that no matter how busy he was that day, he would come pick her up himself and surprise her. As Emily watched the sky outside the airport darken, her heart still felt warm. 5 years of marriage had worn down the initial passion, but these quiet gestures of care made her feel secure. Her plane landed at 3 p.m. She followed the crowd out, stood at the agreed-upon exit C, and texted Mark, "Hey, honey. I landed. Waiting for you at exit C." The message disappeared into silence. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. She watched people gather and disperse outside the arrivals gate. One by one, faces, familiar or unfamiliar, were greeted and taken home. Eventually only Emily remained, standing there beside her silent suitcase. Maybe traffic was bad, she told herself. Maybe a meeting at the office ran late. In New York, who could predict traffic? She sent another message. No rush. Drive safe. Still no reply. Time ticked by. Outside, the sky finally gave way and rain poured down in sheets. Heavy drops slammed against the glass roof of the terminal, thunderously loud. Cold winds slipped through the doors. Emily was wearing a thin knit dress, and the chill crept from her feet all the way into her chest. 3 hours. She waited there for 3 full hours. Finally, her phone lit up. Not a call. Just a cold text message from Mark. Something urgent came up at the office. Can't leave. Just take a cab home. I'll be back later. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Not even a simple "did you land safely?" Emily stared at the message, her fingertips turning cold. She was about to reply when her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mark. It was her friend Susan, who also happened to be the administrative assistant at Mark's company. Susan had sent a screenshot, an Instagram story. The post was from Mark's newly hired personal assistant, a young woman fresh out of an Ivy League school named Jessica. The photo was taken from the passenger seat of a car. Rain streaked across the window, blurring the neon lights outside. But the hand on the steering wheel in the driver's seat was perfectly clear. Long fingers. And at the cuff, a custom cufflink set with a deep ocean blue gemstone. Emily had given those cufflinks to Mark as an anniversary gift last year. The caption read, "Getting a personal ride home from the boss in a rainstorm." Feeling so cared for, Emily's breath caught. 3 minutes earlier, Mark had told her he was tied up at the office with urgent work. And now his car was parked neatly outside Jessica's apartment building. Emily didn't reply. She didn't call to question him. She simply took a deep breath, dragged her suitcase out into the pouring rain, hailed a taxi, and gave the driver an address completely opposite from home, the small apartment she had bought before she got married. That night, Emily developed a high fever. She lay alone in the empty apartment wrapped in blankets, dizzy, her throat burning like fire. Her phone rested beside her pillow, completely silent. Mark never asked if she had made it home. He never asked if she had eaten. He never noticed anything was wrong. Not until late at night did the phone suddenly explode with messages. All from Mark. "Where did you go? My parents waited all night and you didn't even call. Emily, when did you become so inconsiderate?" Every line was an accusation. Emily stared at the messages. Beneath her burning forehead, her heart grew colder and colder. He knew she had been caught in the rain at the airport. He knew he had broken his promise. Yet somehow he could still turn around and blame her without a trace of guilt. She didn't reply. Instead, She opened their family group chat and posted 2 screenshots, Jessica's Instagram story and Mark's accusatory messages. She added just one line, "Sorry I missed dinner tonight. Mark was busy driving his new assistant home and couldn't pick me up." After sending it, she tossed the phone aside, gathered what little strength she had left, and took a cab to the emergency room. The ER was brightly lit, filled with the smell of disinfectant and the groans of patients. Emily got her medication and sat in the waiting area, looking down at the doctor's instructions in her hand. Suddenly, she heard a voice so familiar it made her blood run cold. "Careful. Hold on to me. Slow down." She looked up sharply. A few steps away, Mark was carefully helping Jessica walk toward the examination area. Jessica's left ankle was wrapped in a thick bandage, and she was practically hanging on to him, their posture intimate. What struck Emily the most was how Jessica tilted her head toward Mark's lit phone screen, her lips almost brushing his ear as she whispered something. The gesture stabbed at Emily's eyes. She remembered once accidentally glancing at Mark's phone. He had immediately frowned and snapped the screen off, saying irritably, "Emily, can you give me a little privacy?" And now Jessica could casually look at all of his messages. Mark saw her too. His face changed instantly. He instinctively let go of Jessica's arm. "Emily? What are you doing here?" There was no concern in his voice, only surprise, and a hint of anger at being caught. Emily let out a cold laugh. "What? Does the hospital belong to you? Or am I the only one who's not allowed here?" Mark frowned and quickly adopted a businesslike tone, sounding impatient. Jessica twisted her ankle. "I just brought her to see a doctor. Don't overthink it." Then he paused, eyeing her suspiciously. "You weren't following me, were you? Following him?" When Emily heard those words, she almost laughed out loud. She ignored him and turned her gaze toward Jessica. The young woman immediately lowered her head. Her eyes reddened, and she looked like a frightened deer, fragile and pitiful. Her fingers nervously clutched Mark's sleeve. When Emily said nothing, Mark took it as a sign of guilt. His tone became even more self-righteous. "She just moved to New York. She doesn't know the city and got lost trying to get home. As her boss, I helped out a new employee. What's wrong with that? As for you, I already explained things to my parents. You have to go see them tomorrow. Don't make them worry again." He spoke as if he were the reasonable one, the one making sacrifices and keeping the bigger picture in mind. Just then, Mark's phone buzzed. Jessica instinctively leaned in to look again, but the moment she saw the screen, her face turned pale. Mark glanced down. It was a message from the family group chat. He saw the 2 screenshots Emily had posted, and her cold caption. His face instantly turned dark. "You posted this in the family group," he snapped, glaring at her. Jessica's tears fell even faster. She sniffled softly, her voice sweet and trembling. "Emily, I was just thanking Mark for driving me home. I didn't mean anything else. Please don't misunderstand." "Enough," Emily cut her off coldly. "If you've done nothing wrong, why are you so scared?" Mark's expression hardened completely. "Emily, do you really have to make such a scene?" "Who's the one making a scene?" Emily asked calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear. "You're the one who broke your promise. You're the one who lied. And now you're the one trying to turn the blame around. If it looks ugly, it's because what you did was ugly to begin with." Mark was left speechless, his face shifting between pale and flushed. After a moment, he forced out another accusation. "So you really did follow me here?" Emily didn't bother explaining anymore. She simply lifted the small bag of medicine in her hand. "I came to see a doctor." Only then did Mark notice how unnaturally pale she looked, her cracked lips, her exhausted face. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes. He instinctively reached out to support her. "You have a fever? I'll drive you home." Emily stepped aside, avoiding his touch. Her eyes flicked toward Jessica, who was still leaning against him. "What about her?" "Of course I have to take her home first." Mark answered immediately, as if it were obvious. "Her ankle's injured. I'll come back to you right after I drop her off." Jessica quickly added, her voice soft and considerate, "Mark, I can just take a cab." "You should stay with Emily." Mark frowned and shook his head firmly. "No. Your foot is injured. I have to take you." Then he turned back to Emily, his tone softening slightly, almost coaxing. "Emily, just wait for me. Don't overthink this. I'll be back soon." Emily looked at the scene in front of her and suddenly felt it was unbelievably ridiculous. She didn't want to say another word. She simply turned and walked toward the rideshare car waiting outside. Before closing the door, she said without looking back, "No need. Today I finally understand something. Relying on yourself is better than relying on anyone else." As the car door shut, she heard Jessica's tearful voice behind her. Mark, this is all my fault. In the rearview mirror, Mark stood frozen in place, his expression dark and furious. Emily leaned back against the seat. Her feverish head felt heavy, but one thought grew clearer and clearer. This man, and this marriage, were no longer worth it. That night, Mark didn't return home until 2 a.m. The living room was completely dark. The bedroom door was closed, and not a sliver of light shone through the crack. For the first time since they got married, Emily had gone to sleep without waiting for him. The next morning, when Emily woke up, Mark was already standing in the living room, fully dressed, like someone preparing for a negotiation. When he saw her, he immediately walked over. His tone was much softer than the night before, deliberately apologetic. Emily, about yesterday. I admit I was wrong. After I dropped Jessica off, I left right away. I didn't stay long. He paused. There was an urgent situation at the company, that's why I couldn't pick you up. That's on me. And last night I didn't realize you were sick. That's my fault. Emily didn't respond. She walked straight to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. He followed her, continuing his speech of reconciliation. But you weren't completely right either. Even if you were upset, you shouldn't have just disappeared and skipped dinner at my parents' place. They waited all night and were worried. Then he tried to wrap things up. With a casual tone. How about this? We both made mistakes this time. Let's just forget it and move on. No need to bring it up again. Emily set the glass down. It made a sharp sound against the metal counter. Mark seemed to take that as a sign she was calming down. He stepped closer and even began defending Jessica. Jessica just joined the company. She's still basically a kid. She's very serious about her work, just a bit outgoing and lively. She's not scheming or anything, just a little naive. If you get to know her better, you'll change your opinion. Emily finally looked up and interrupted him. That won't be necessary. Mark's smile froze. What do you mean? Last night at the hospital, Emily said lightly, when she saw me, she didn't call me Emily or even Mrs. Vice President. She curled her lips slightly. I'm not interested in finding out how naive she is. What I do know is that a truly naive girl wouldn't post something that's suggestive when her boss is a married man. She's new to the real world. Mark shot back immediately, his tone turning stiff. She doesn't understand these complicated social rules. You can't just fire someone over something so trivial. The company is yours, Emily said, turning toward the entryway and picking up her bag. If you insist on keeping her, there's nothing I can do. Mark's expression darkened completely. He stood there, chest rising and falling, before finally letting out a cold laugh. Fine. Think whatever you want. He grabbed his briefcase angrily. But just before leaving, almost unconsciously, he opened the refrigerator and took out an insulated bag. Emily noticed it immediately. Inside were neatly packed glass containers, the tiramisu she had made the night before, portioned carefully. Later that morning, Susan texted again. Another screenshot of Jessica's Instagram story. In the photo, an elegant breakfast plate sat beside a glass container that Emily recognized instantly. The caption read, "Thank you to my boss for the sweet breakfast and dessert. Starting the day full of energy." At the end was a playful heart emoji. Emily stared at the photo for 3 seconds. Then she suddenly laughed. That tiramisu was the one she had made herself. She had prepared too much, so she had portioned it out and put it in the fridge. The insulated bag Mark took that morning contained exactly that. He had taken the dessert she made and used it to please the same Jessica he kept insisting was just a subordinate. This time, Emily didn't feel angry. She didn't cry. She simply closed the chat window and looked at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. A cold smile slowly curved at the corner of her lips. If they liked that dessert so much, she wouldn't mind giving them something to like even more. A week later came the company's annual celebration banquet. The crystal chandeliers of a luxury Manhattan hotel lit up the ballroom brilliantly. Emily walked into the hall slowly in a black evening gown, holding the leash of the golden retriever she had raised for 3 years. The surrounding conversations paused for a brief moment. Amid quiet whispers, she smiled and walked toward the lounge area. An assistant immediately handed her a delicate dessert box. Inside was the exact same tiramisu that had appeared in Jessica's Instagram posts. Under the puzzled gaze of everyone in the room, Emily placed the dessert in front of her beloved golden retriever. Emily, dogs probably shouldn't eat too many sweets, right? Someone she knew well couldn't help but say. She gently patted the dog's head, her voice just loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. I actually made this as a treat for him. She paused and then sighed with a hint of regret. But during his checkup a few days ago, the vet said sweets aren't good for his health, so today he can have it one last time. As for the rest of them, she glanced meaningfully. Around the room. I've already disposed of them. A deathly silence fell over the ballroom. A few seconds later, someone sharply inhaled. Then countless eyes turned in unison toward the corner of the room, where Jessica stood in a brand new Chanel dress. She was staring at the dessert plate in front of the golden retriever, her face completely pale, her whole body trembling. Emily elegantly wiped her hands and watched as Jessica, under the mixture of mocking and curious stares from the crowd, finally broke down. Covering her face, she stumbled out of the ballroom on 10-centimeter heels. Not far away, Mark stood beside the champagne tower, gripping his glass so tightly his hand was shaking. Emily met his stunned gaze from across the room and raised her glass with a faint smile. Now that is what it really means to dispose of something, isn't it? That night, Mark stormed back home like a furious lion. Emily. His voice sounded like blades scraping against glass. What exactly are you trying to do? Are you really that vicious? Humiliating Jessica at the company banquet? Just because you think she doesn't deserve to eat something you made? Who do you think you are? He strode over and slammed his palm onto the coffee table, making the decorations on it jump. Emily looked at his furious face and suddenly felt both unfamiliarity and amusement. She quietly waited until he finished shouting every ugly accusation. Then she stood up and took a small wooden music box out of the drawer. It was a limited edition piece Mark had waited months to buy during their first year of dating. Their initials were engraved on it. Mark's eyes landed on the music box. For a split second, his expression softened. Then his irritation returned. Don't think pulling out old sentimental stuff will make me calm down. What you did this time was way over the line. Emily gently placed the music box on the coffee table. She didn't say a word. Instead, she bent down and pulled out a small craft hammer she had already prepared from the shelf beneath the table. The metal head gleamed coldly under the ceiling light. Mark's expression froze. The moment the hammer came down, his pupils shrank. Wait. Bang. The crisp sound of shattering echoed through the living room. Crystal fragments scattered across the wooden floor like fallen stars. Have you lost your mind? Mark's face turned pale as he lunged forward to grab the hammer. The second strike. The third. Gears flew apart. Keys snapped. The metal plate engraved with their initials twisted out of shape. When the final blow landed, the music box that once held countless sweet memories had been reduced to a pile of irreparable scraps. Mark stood there stiffly, his lips trembling, unable to say a single word. Emily set the hammer down. Tiny shards of glass slipped from her palm. Her voice was as clear and cold as ice clinking against a glass. Mark, let's get a divorce. Her in-laws arrived faster than she expected. When the doorbell rang, Mark had locked himself in the study, refusing to sign the divorce papers he had already printed. Emily opened the door. Her mother-in-law wore a strained smile, while her father-in-law stood stiffly behind her, holding 2 expensive boxes of health supplements, as if that alone could repair the cracks their son had created. Emily, her mother-in-law said, grabbing her hand the moment she stepped inside. Her palm was warm and slightly damp. Can't we just talk things out? Mark has always been stubborn. Please be patient with him. Emily gently withdrew her hand and led them into the living room. Mark came out when he heard the noise. A hint of smugness flashed across his face. He clearly believed his parents would help him fix things. Dad, Mom, Emily said calmly as she poured them tea, her tone as steady as if she were presenting a work report. Since you're here, I think some things should be said clearly in front of everyone. She opened the photo album on her phone and swiped through the images one by one. The empty airport arrivals gate during the rainstorm. Jessica's suggestive social media post. The hospital ER registration slip. The dessert photo. The banquet scene where people watched the golden retriever eating tiramisu. With each image she showed, her in-laws' expressions stiffened further. On the 15th of last month, Mark promised to pick me up from the airport but didn't show up. I waited in the rain for 3 hours and later had a 104-degree fever. Her finger paused on the hospital registration photo. At that time, he was driving his new assistant Jessica home. Her mother-in-law opened her mouth as if to speak, but Emily continued. When I went to the hospital, I ran into them together. Mark's first reaction wasn't to explain, it was to accuse me of following him. Her father-in-law's brow tightened. Last week, the dessert I personally made was taken by him to please that girl. She opened Jessica's bragging social media post. And afterward he insisted I was overreacting. Mark suddenly jumped to his feet, humiliated and angry. Emily. You, sit down. Her father-in-law's shout cut him off instantly. Even her mother-in-law flinched. Emily played one final recording. It was Mark's furious voice from the night before, blasting through the living room. *, you really think she doesn't deserve to eat something you made? Who do you think you are? Asterisk when the recording ended, the room fell into a suffocating silence. The teacup in her mother-in-law's hand rattled slightly. Her father-in-law's face had turned as dark as a storm cloud. Dad, Mom, Emily said quietly, turning off her phone. If your daughter had a husband like this, would you tell her to keep enduring it? Her mother-in-law's eyes turned red. Her father-in-law let out a heavy sigh. They exchanged a glance filled with struggle and guilt, but also the helplessness of parents facing the undeniable fault of their own son. Finally, her father-in-law stood up, walked over to Mark, and patted him on the shoulder. You, take care of yourself. Her mother-in-law looked at Emily as if she wanted to say something, but in the end said nothing and followed her husband out. The moment the door closed, Mark's expression collapsed as if someone had pulled the backbone from his body. He had probably never imagined that even his parents, who loved him most, would not stand on his side this time. But even then, he stubbornly refused to agree to the divorce. He believed Emily was just angry for the moment. That eventually she would calm down, compromise, and everything would return to the way it was before. Emily didn't argue with him anymore. Instead, she made another decision. To leave, for a while. The wheels of her suitcase rolled heavily across the wooden floor. Mark stood by the door, gripping the unsigned divorce papers in his hand. Do you really have to leave? His voice was hoarse, dark circles heavy under his eyes. We can talk about this. Emily zipped up the suitcase. The metallic click sounded especially crisp. Everything that needed to be said has already been said. Then where are you going? He stepped forward. At least tell me, it doesn't matter. Emily stood up and placed her passport and plane ticket into her bag. I'll be back in 2 months. Hopefully by then you'll have made up your mind. Mark swallowed, as if forcing down words he couldn't bring himself to say. He probably thought this was just an ordinary separation. But this time, it was different. Emily rolled her suitcase to the front door. Before opening it, she turned back for one last look. Mark stood where he was, unmoving. The setting sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, stretching his shadow long across the room, lying between them like a silent divide. Emily, she didn't wait for him to finish. She gently closed the door behind her. 2 months later, the rainy season had just ended. Emily stood once again in front of the villa that had once belonged to them, suitcase in hand. 2 months was enough time for a lot of things to settle, and for her resolve to harden. As her key turned in the lock, she heard something she hadn't heard in a long time, the lively sound of a family meal inside, laughter and conversation drifting through the door. When she stepped inside, the scene that greeted her was even more jarring than she had imagined. Mark sat at the head of the table. His parents sat on either side. And Jessica was placing a golden brown roasted chicken wing into her mother-in-law's bowl. There were 7 or 8 dishes spread across the table. The whole scene looked warm, abundant, almost domestic. Jessica is such a thoughtful girl, unlike some people, her mother-in-law said, her voice full of obvious approval. She actually pays attention to what we like to eat. Her father-in-law said nothing, but the smile lines at the corners of his eyes made his feelings just as clear. Jessica lowered her head shyly, her ears turning pink. She looked uncannily like a new bride trying to please her husband's family. The wheels of Emily's suitcase made a soft sound against the floor. All 4 of them turned toward the doorway at once. The air froze. Mark reacted first. His chair scraped harshly against the floor. Emily. He practically jumped to his feet. Surprise, panic, and something unreadable flashed across his face. You're back. Where have you been these past 2 months? I was worried about you. He hurried toward her as if to hug her, carrying with him a scent that didn't belong to him, a perfume Emily recognized as Jessica's. Emily stepped aside and avoided him. Her eyes moved past his shoulder and landed on Jessica, who had gone rigid by the table. The young woman's fingers were twisting together nervously. The nude nail polish on them was the exact shade Emily used to wear. Mark. Emily tipped her chin toward Jessica and laughed softly. Mark's outstretched arms froze in midair. Behind him, his mother's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto her plate. I won't interrupt, Emily said, not staying inside for a second longer. She turned and walked back toward the front entrance. Mark chased after her. He caught her wrist on the stone path outside, gripping hard enough to hurt. Emily, listen to me, he said, breathing fast. Jessica just came over for dinner. My parents like her too. Emily shook off his hand and pressed her car key. A black sedan parked not far away flashed its headlights. In the front passenger seat sat a young man in gold-rimmed glasses, looking down at a stack of documents. Mark's expression froze. He stared at the man in the car, and his voice shot up sharply. Who is that? Emily, were you with him these past 2 months? Are you? Emily let out a laugh. The whole scene was so absurd it was almost funny. Mark, be careful what you say. She opened the car door slowly. The man inside looked up with a faint, knowing smile. Smoothing the crease at her cuff, Emily said, "Let me introduce you. This is my cousin Tom. He just graduated, and he's currently interning at my studio. For now, he's also serving as my assistant." Tom adjusted his glasses and nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Mark." Mark stood there with his mouth open, like a fish gasping for air. Moonlight fell across his twisted expression, turning all his unspoken suspicion and jealousy into a joke. After all, 2 months earlier, he had stood in almost exactly the same position, smugly explaining Jessica away to Emily. It turned out that when the blade of distrust cuts toward you, everyone bleeds. Everyone hurts. Emily asked for a divorce again. This time, Mark's attitude changed. He didn't yell. Instead, there was something almost pleading in his voice. "Emily, stop doing this." He reached for her wrist again, and again she stepped away. "Everything before was my fault. I'm sorry. Jessica, I can transfer her to a branch office, or move her to another department, but firing her is out of the question," Emily finished for him, a mocking curve at the corner of her mouth. "Because technically she hasn't violated company policy. Right?" Mark swallowed. His silence was answer enough. Just then, his parents came outside. His mother hurried over and once again tried to hold Emily's hand, the gold bracelet on her wrist pressing painfully against Emily's skin. "Emily, Mark has already given in this much. You should know when to stop. What married couple stays angry forever? Do you really have to make this so ugly for both families?" Then his father spoke too, in the tone of someone scolding a child who didn't know better. "When men are out in the world, there are times when things are beyond their control. As his wife, you need to be more generous." Emily slowly pulled her hand back and looked at their faces, the same patronizing expression on both of them, the same smug kind of tolerance. 2 months ago, they had been silent because they knew their son was in the wrong. Now they had convinced themselves that Emily would do what she had always done before, compromise. She said nothing. She simply took out her phone and dialed the very first number in her contacts list. "Dad," she said when the call connected. Mark's pupils contracted sharply. "We couldn't reach an agreement here. Let's go ahead with what we discussed." She hung up. A strange silence fell over the room. Her father-in-law reacted first, his face changing instantly. "Emily, what are you doing?" Emily looked past them toward the Manhattan skyline in the distance and remembered what her father had told her the month before at his private club on Long Island. At the time, he had been swirling a glass of red wine while the projector cast financial statements behind him. The numbers highlighted in red were all from the independent projects Mark had been so proud of over the years. And every one of those projects, in one way or another, had been built on Emily's family's resources and connections. Less than 24 hours after that phone call, Mark's company's stock began to plunge off a cliff. Emily sat in her father's study, watching the red numbers flash across a real-time monitor. Her father's executive assistant was giving a report. "After our withdrawal of investment, all 5 of the company's active construction projects have been suspended. Their partner banks have already sent people to headquarters." Her father poured tea slowly, steam rising from the spout of the clay teapot. "For all these years, his family has profited from this marriage," he said calmly. "Now it's time for them to pay every bit of it back, with interest." That was when Mark and his father finally panicked. They finally understood how serious things had become and began frantically trying to contact Emily's father. They called. They texted. They even showed up in person. But Emily's father either ignored the calls or had his secretary turn them away. He wouldn't see them at all. Under the crushing pressure of a company on the verge of collapse, Mark finally gave in. He signed. The day they finalized the divorce, the sky was gray and overcast, the kind of weather that seemed made for sad endings. Outside the civil affairs office, Mark looked exhausted beyond recognition. All his old confidence and polish were gone. His suit was badly wrinkled, and his tie was crooked. He stared at the green divorce certificate in Emily's hand, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Emily, I admit it, I crossed a line with Jessica. The autumn wind swept dead leaves between them. But did it really have to come to this?" His eyes were bloodshot. "Nothing ever actually happened between me and her, Mark," Emily interrupted, her tone as calm as if they were discussing the weather. "If Jessica had been a male subordinate, would you have taken the tiramisu I made and brought it to him specially?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Would you have ditched me in the middle of a rainstorm just because he said he was scared, and driven him home instead?" She ran her fingers over the smooth cover of the divorce certificate. "Would you have gotten that angry at me for his sake, called me bitter, petty, and mean?" Mark swallowed once, then again. In the end, he said nothing. He knew the answer. So did she. Emily turned and walked toward the parking lot. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, warming the divorce certificate in her hand. In the rearview mirror, Mark still stood where he was, his shadow stretched long behind him, like a thorn that had finally been pulled from her heart. Life after divorce was peaceful and full. Emily threw all her energy into her architectural design studio. Without all the emotional drain, suspicion, and quiet damage, she thrived. Her studio kept landing one major project after another. Then one day, 3 months later, at 3 in the morning, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. But Emily knew exactly who it was. "Thank you for bringing us together." The glow of the screen reflected the cold smile at the corner of Emily's lips. That woman probably didn't know yet that on the very day Mark signed the divorce papers, his company's stock had already hit the daily limit, down 3 times in a row. The so-called "bringing us together" had only handed her a collapsing mess riddled with holes. Emily deleted the ridiculous, taunting message and went back to reviewing her quarterly reports. A few days later, the financial headlines were suddenly pushed aside by a far more shocking piece of breaking news. Shocking. Newlywed tragedy in New Jersey, wealthy family turns into bloodbath, parents dead. Emily's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. In the news photo, a familiar villa was surrounded by yellow police tape. She scrolled down, and more details surfaced. It turned out that after being forced to divorce Emily, Mark hadn't done what Jessica had fantasized about, cherish her immediately and marry her happily ever after. Instead, he dumped all his resentment and frustration, losing Emily, losing the support of her family, and watching his company crumble, onto Jessica. But the most terrifying part came after they got married. Less than a month after the divorce, Mark married Jessica. Everyone thought it was a case of true love triumphing over a business marriage. Until the police discovered something else during the investigation. Mark had used Jessica's ID to borrow money from 7 underground lenders, taking out more than $1 billion in high-interest loans. He deliberately started borrowing the day after they registered their marriage, Tom explained to Emily over the phone. Every loan contract had a copy of their marriage certificate attached. As far as the lenders are concerned, Jessica is the only debtor. What made it even more absurd was that Mark hadn't used the money to save his company's finances. Instead, he quietly purchased assets in Switzerland and Singapore and completed immigration arrangements for his parents. And 1 week before the murders, he had planned to take his parents and leave the country, abandoning Jessica to deal with the debt. Surveillance footage showed that on the night of the incident, at 10:17 p.m., Jessica walked into the living room carrying a plate of fruit. At 10:23 p.m., the scream of Mark's father woke the entire neighborhood. The coroner's report was horrifying. Mark's mother had been stabbed 9 times. His father's neck artery had been pierced by a fruit knife. And Mark himself, Emily zoomed in on the screenshot from the news. On the stretcher being loaded into the ambulance, the crotch of Mark's suit pants was soaked in dark red. On the television, a reporter was interviewing the lead investigator. The suspect, Ms. Sue, stated that she discovered plane tickets to Singapore and debt notices in a safe in the study. When she saw copies of her own ID attached to the loan agreements, she realized her new husband had used her identity to accumulate more than $1 billion in debt. Emily turned off the television and sat silently for a long time. Outside the window, early summer sunlight filled the city, so peaceful it felt like a completely different world from the bloody night described on the news. Jessica was arrested on charges of intentional homicide and intentional assault and was formally prosecuted. Because the crime was so severe, she was quickly sentenced to death. On the afternoon the verdict was announced, Emily was standing in the grand conference hall of the most luxurious hotel downtown. On behalf of her design studio, she was signing a multi-million-dollar strategic partnership agreement with a world-renowned international architectural firm. The signing ceremony was a complete success. Flowers, applause, champagne, camera flashes from reporters. After the event, Emily and her team prepared to head to the hotel's rooftop revolving restaurant for a private celebration. As she stepped into the hotel's glittering lobby, the phone in her pocket vibrated lightly. She took it out and glanced at the screen. Another anonymous message. "I'm sorry. I hope we can still be husband and wife in the next life." Emily stared at the words for 3 seconds. Then her thumb moved gently and tapped delete. Along with the message, the last remnants of his lingering regret vanished into the endless current of digital data. The revolving doors slowly turned, swallowing her figure into the bright lobby. Behind her, a cleaner was vigorously scrubbing the marble tiles at the entrance. As if even the ground shouldn't be allowed to keep any trace that the man had ever existed. And that's where today's story ends. Emily's ending isn't the typical kind of revenge-fulfilled. It's something colder and more complicated, a quiet settling of dust. She never picked up the knife herself. Instead, she wielded something far sharper: independence, clarity of mind, and the strength that comes from never relying on anyone else. As for Mark and Jessica, one died because of greed and betrayal, the other because of madness and despair. Both believed they were manipulating the other, only to be devoured by their own desires in the end. So what does this story tell us? Marriage may not be the end of life, but losing yourself almost always marks the beginning of tragedy. Thank you for listening to this episode of Marriage is Not the End. If you enjoyed today's story, please remember to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who might need it. See you next time.